Wonderful. So now I can see our virtual room is filling up ever so slightly. So let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the AgriFutures Chicken Meat Program webinar series. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement to country. AgriFutures Australia acknowledges the First Nations people of Australia as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we live, learn and work. We pay our respects to past, present and future elders of these nations and any First Nations people on this webinar today. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people of Australia, the traditional custodians of the lands and waters where I am hosting this webinar from today. To those of you who are new here, it's lovely to have you here, and to those returning to the series, it's also lovely to have you here, and welcome back. Before we get into exploring the research being featured in the webinar today, a little housekeeping. So we will be recording today's session, and that recording has started, and we'll be making that available through our regular online channels. As I run through the housekeeping items, there will be an introductory poll that pops up on the screen with some questions just to gauge who's in our virtual room with us. So whilst I'm going through the next little part, I'll leave it to you to respond to those questions there. As this is a webinar, your video and audio functionality are not enabled, and this is just so that you can best view the presentations being shared, and it's also to minimize any background noises or distractions to our invited speakers. We will have time for questions and answers, and those will be at the conclusion of the webinar content. In the meantime, there is the Q&A function that you guys can use to add any questions that you might have over the course of today's presentations. So quick introduction to myself and today's webinar content before we hand over to our speakers. My name is Sarika Pandya. I'm the research manager, part of the broader AgriFutures Levied and Emerging Industries team, and I specifically look after the chicken meat research development and extension program. So this webinar is part of a series where we've hosted expert presenters to provide you with the latest information on topics that are relevant to industry as well as our research priorities. And today's content features some of the new projects that had commenced in the second half of 2024, so last year. So earlier this year, we featured, in February, we had a webinar which featured some of the other projects that had commenced around the same time. And these were all born from an open call where the program sought proposals that were innovative and had the potential to bring some changes in some of our priority areas that are captured in the Chicken Meat RD&E strategic plan. The program called for proposals that address the current needs and challenges, which included an unprecedented period of biosecurity threats and an industry that was looking to strengthen its food safety culture. As a result, the program did contract 8 new research projects, and today you're going to hear about 2 more of those projects. So I hope you enjoyed today's content. So first, I'd like to, whilst I introduce our first speaker, that's Dr. Leslie Duffy, I'll invite Leslie to turn on her video and start sharing her slides. So Dr. Leslie Duffy is a research-based food safety microbiologist and team leader for the applied microbiology team in the microbial food systems group in the food program at CSIRO. Her research has largely been on foodborne pathogens such as E. coli, Listeria, Salmonella, and Campylobacteria. Her research projects have included the ecology of these organisms in production systems throughout the supply chain from on-farm to retail, and that includes source tracking and transcriptomics to understand stress survival through processing and the change from the microbiome from farm to fork. So Leslie will be informing us today on poultry spoilage and interventions for shelf life and safety improvements. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Leslie.
Thanks, Sarika. Just checking first that you can hear me.
Can hear you and can see your slides in presentation mode.
Thanks very much. So thanks for people for attending today, and thanks for the opportunity to present some upfront information about the current project we have with AgriFutures Chicken Meat Program. As Sarika said, it's poultry spoilage and interventions for shelf life and safety improvements is the full title for this project. Started in June, July last year, and it'll run through till June 2026. So what this project's actually about, from that rather lengthy title, is looking at a system called electrostatic spraying system, or ESS. And CSIRO was first we sort of heard about it, but were first really made aware of the potential of this to reduce microbial load on foods via the red meat industry and the Australian Meat Processors Corporation, AMPC. And we've noticed it's as we've become interested in it, there's quite a lot of applications across many food industries. You can see here it's being used as a handheld sprayer in beef processing. It's been used in the horticultural industry here, spraying potentially ginger. And it's also being used, at least in the US, in the poultry industry. So through a different funding arrangement, CSIRO's actually purchased a 6-nozzle system through MaxCharge, and which is an American company, and they supply into the poultry industry and other areas in the US. And this is to ensure we bought that particular type of nozzle system to ensure the trials could be conducted across various commodities. We should be able to utilise it for trials for beef carcasses, as well as just taking it down, obviously, through the chicken space in this particular project, which should also be able to allow us to have trial applications for the horticultural industry. So how does it actually work? Well, this is actually the nozzle is patented, and it's an air atomizing induction charging nozzle, and it was invented at the University of Georgia. So air and liquid enter the nozzle through separate lines, and as the air moves through the nozzle under pressure, it meets the liquid at the tip, and there's an electrode there, but it causes spray droplets to be formed, and they're about 30 to 60 microns, and they produce quite a turbulent flow. But there's an electrode at the tip, and this creates the negative charge on the spray. So in this diagram, it's spray painting was originally with a positive charge. So this was actually from spray painting days without a charge, with no electrostatics on that paint. It stays dark on the opposite side, but if you've got electrostatics, you see on the left-hand side of that picture there, the whole, it forms, it is attracted to the whole surface, it'll move around the whole surface. So that's the basic kind of idea behind this particular max charge setup. So the charge on the droplets, besides being turbulent as it goes through the nozzle, the charge is keeping this droplet separate enough, but it's also, the charge is also pulling it towards the target and then helping to pull it around the target so all areas are covered. But what it's not, so some people describe it as a fog or a mist, which it's not, due to the, in physics, there's actually a size that determines that that's a fog or it's a mist. So it fits almost neatly between the two of them. So fog droplets are 5 to 10, but they don't have enough volume to be effective in this type of process. And it's not a mist because they're 50 to 100 microns, and they're too large, and they can't cross the distance despite the pressure that's applied through the air pressure going through the nozzle, and they fall obviously due to gravity. So in setting up the system in this particular one, there's a requirement for air pressure to be going through that nozzle, and depending on how many nozzles you have, determines how much pressure is required. And then at each of those nozzles, you can test as we commissioned the instrument. We were testing, make sure that each of the nozzles was getting the right amount of flow, the right amount of air pressure coming through. And there's a number of other operating parameters that we were first having a look at as we set up the equipment. It's quite a simple, straightforward equipment. It's not particularly large, and there's quite a long cord or line connected from the unit itself to the nozzles, because they're the handheld ones, so we can move things around as we like. So the idea is obviously that you get a charge. and -4 or more negative. I say we did struggle with this, people saying if -4 or greater, well, -4 was that going into the positive space, and -4 going more negative. So we've chosen to write it as -4 or more negative. You can adjust the flow rates between 150 to 200 mils per minute. And you can adjust the air pressure at the main air manifold, but also at the nozzle regulator for each of the nozzles. And there's a small, you can't quite see it in that top picture there on the right. It's a small pressurized tank, which has fairly low air pressure in that tank. So the project design, originally the first part of the project was just to get the equipment up and running and make sure that under our hands it actually functioned as it was designed to do by the manufacturers. So we weren't putting any disinfectants through, we were just looking at water on whole birds. Could we get the pressure right, the flow, the charge, and the setup of the equipment so that we were coating the birds effectively, that they were getting enough time as they passed through the equipment. We did have some issues in the setup, but they assured us that normally, because most of their sales are made into the US, they actually send a team around to help with the install to ensure that it's actually functioning as per their standards. We didn't find it onerous. It just took us quite a few goes to just get it going. And once it was going and it was effective, we haven't had any issues with it since. So I'd say it's reasonably straightforward to set up, and they were quite proactive with getting back to us. It helped with them being in the US. It'd send them a message, get an answer overnight. So that seemed to work. So the questions we were looking to answer was, could we use this for applying disinfectants onto whole birds? And after discussion points with the steering committee, we're looking at using PAA and acidified sodium chloride and our standard chlorine at the different pH there, and then also about where we would potentially apply this, or where it could be applied in a normal system. So after the inside-outside wash, so immediately before it enters chill, and then again after it's been through the chill, whether that was just after immersion or whether it was immersion and air chill, depending on the what was being run in the plants. We're only looking at aerobic plate counts at the moment, and we know from some of the last whole bird national surveys that have been conducted that the standard deviation for plate counts on whole carcasses is about 0.7 log coliform units per carcass. So we know that with, we originally were looking at 30 birds without treatment and 30 birds with treatment to be able to tell that there was a difference. And the power of that with a standard deviation, presuming it's a 95%, the power of that, if you were looking for just a half a log, is still over 70% when we've got 30 birds. But when we added in the extra factor of where in the line this might be applied, we didn't want to. The birds are being supplied to us by industry, so, and it's a time and a complication to their work day. So we're still only collecting the 60 birds for each trial and doing 15 with and without treatment before the chill. So after that inside-outside wash, and again after the chill. So while that doesn't give us quite as much statistical power, it's certainly still giving us a good indication. And then we'll run some extra trials to get the statistical validation that those ones that are showing promise are still working. And of course, we're doing them in triplicate because we know, every flock can be variable on the counts and what's going on with them. So as we move through these studies, I'm not presenting the results of the data today, but as we move through these studies, we'll have some sort of answer about, is the application of these chemicals in this fashion useful? Is it actually providing a benefit to the industry? And hopefully the point of application was also raised in the steering committee. So it's just showing the benefit of having a steering committee over and above when you initially put projects together. What's the impact on the shelf life? So while we're obviously sampling fairly quickly after they've been sprayed, if we then took those birds and stored them for their normal shelf life, are we actually perhaps producing a lag on the organisms so that their shelf life might be extended by 1 or 2 days? And then the other thing that was originally put into the project and still will occur is portions. Because in the US, it's used in the poultry industry on a conveyor belt style, often on portions. And obviously there is more time for contamination or spread of contamination of different organisms when you're going through that whole cut-up process. So we know from some other work that thighs would be a good thing to target. So we'll be looking at your standard thigh, skin off, bone out in portions under whichever one of these systems we select to use that looks like it has the most potential. So the benefits of this particular type of ESS, it's quite easy to disassemble and clean. You use less chemicals because it's obviously not a dip, it's a spray. You do get uniform coverage and a high deposition of the chemical. And a lot of the data around those two aspects come from the horticultural industry because they've used this sort of system instead of fogging or using hydraulic pressure to spray onto perhaps pesticides onto crops. They know using this system, the chemicals they spray actually move around the entire crop, so under the leaf, above the leaf, that sort of thing. So those 2 points come largely from the horticultural space. And then obviously lower water usage if you're not producing a dip that you've got to continually keep topped up and ensure it's got the right level of chemical. And you're just spraying the birds. We should also be using lower water, so you've got some sustainability benefits as well. So what else can we tell you about the system? As I said, we bought the individual handheld sprays in a 6-nozzle system. You can turn off individual nozzles or turn them on. The current setup we utilise is with 4 sprays, and that's in the middle there. Yes, we've had to kind of jury rig how we might mount them. The diagram on the left is the diagram the manufacturer supplies as a potential conveyor belt system, and we could do something like that when we come to do the portions. And the diagram on the right there contained in that kind of metal cabinet is how they suggest it can be set up in an inline process, and they actually use 6 nozzles, but the line speed of the average line speed that I've seen in poultry plants of recent times is probably faster than what we're getting through a low level gravity spread in the system we've got up. So the birds need the extra sprays. We believe we're getting the same volume on the birds with a slightly slower line speed, even though we've just got on a slope, so it's just going by gravity. The other thing that the charge changes if the air to liquid is out of balance, so getting that air pressure correct is important. So with the less liquid, you'll have a higher charge, but Max Charge have informed us that they found more liquid, the lower charge is also effective in the chicken space. So there's certainly some room to maneuver about how things are set up. This came across when I was searching for some published information. I must admit there's not a lot of published information in the food space, like in the beef or chicken industry, more in the horticulture and in the field work. So is electrostatic the future of poultry pathogen reduction? Potentially, and hopefully this is, even if it's only a small benefit. We're not expecting a silver bullet to solve, Campylobacter or Salmonella, or even lowering our aerobic plate counts. But hopefully even just another added hurdle into the process will have some benefit for the industry going forward. So thank you for listening. Thanks to the poultry companies for supplying the chickens and all our volunteer or voluntold chicken shakers at CSIRO that help process the samples for us, and of course the AgriFutures chicken meat program for funding this particular project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. I'll use this as a reminder for the audience here if you've got any questions, or if you've got any questions that that sort of pop up over the course of the rest of the webinar, please feel free to use that Q&A function, because we will have time with Leslie following the next presentation to ask any of those questions. So with that, I will move into introducing our next set of speakers and invite Kapil and Trang to start sharing their presentation. So Professor Kapil Joshalkar leads a research group at the Roseworthy campus at the University of Adelaide, and his group uses genomics, molecular biology, epidemiology, animal models, field studies, and intervention strategies to address a broad range of issues that relate to foodborne pathogens and poultry health, and with the aim to understand zoonosis. In addition to that, Kapil teaches avian medicine, food safety, and poultry production across 5-degree programs and provides veterinary services to the poultry industry in South Australia. And presenting with Kapil will be Dr. Trang Nguyen, who is a research fellow at the University of Adelaide's Centre for Global Food and Resources. Trained in agricultural and resource economics, her research explores sustainable food systems and consumer behaviour. Trang has contributed to multidisciplinary projects across Australia and Southeast Asia, focusing on food safety, food waste, and agricultural traceability. So during this next segment, we're going to hear an update from Kapil and his team about their project titled Consumer Perceptions and Handling Practices During Purchase, Preparation, Storage and Consumption of Chicken Meat. Over to you, Kapil and Trang.
Thank you, Sarika. Can you hear me okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes, and yes, you're all good to go.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me to give this presentation and update on the project that is being funded by AgriFutures Chicken Meat. Over the years, our group and myself, we have presented different findings related to the microbiological aspect and the epidemiological aspect and the behavior of bacteria, but it was time to turn attention towards what consumers or the chicken people who handle chicken meat in the kitchen environment as well as in the supply chain are actually doing. And so for this project, we worked or collaborated with experts like Trang and Patrick O'Connor, who is the other co-author on this presentation, who work in the space of consumer behavior practices as well as social science behind people's perception and attitudes. So the aspect around food safety issue, as most of you would be aware, the foodborne disease or foodborne illness originating in domestic environment remains the large challenge. Food safety aspect is a priority for the industry. In Australia, there are 4.6 million cases of food poisoning occur each year. Now, particularly, I'd like to draw your attention that not all of these cases are attributed to poultry industry. These are the overall figures of the cases of food poisoning reported across Australia. Chicken meat is Australia's most consumed meat, and there are some aspects of the consumption we looked at as part of this survey. Most of you are aware that per capita consumption is approximately 51 kilo. That's a recent figure, and chicken meat is often implicated in foodborne illness due to risks associated with the foodborne pathogens such as Campylobacter and Salmonella and different serovars of Salmonella. These bacteria are naturally present in the intestine of chooks, and if the chicken meat is not handled or stored or cooked properly, then there's a likelihood of getting the foodborne illness. And as a result, the increasing number of such incidents, they can impact the public trust and impact industry as well. There are several reports of the consumer perception and what the handling practices are in the kitchen environment and after purchase that have been reported overseas. But in Australia, nationally, there is little is known around how consumers perceive around chicken meat safety. So we proposed that the understanding of consumer knowledge, attitudes and practices would help us or help industry to educate, but as well as labeling and policy efforts to reduce the foodborne illness. So the main project objectives as such, there are three main objectives. There was a survey that was conducted back in 2008 and 2019, but that was mostly to understand the household and consumer trends towards the chicken meat consumption. In the survey that we conducted this year, 2025, in addition to those household consumer trends in chicken meat consumption, we also added the food safety aspect into that survey. And so we are looking at the aspect of the food safety and the consumer perceptions. The second objective was obviously learning around food safety issues and consumers' knowledge, attitudes, and behavior of consuming chicken meat. In today's presentation, we'll be mainly focusing on the objective 2 and some of the preliminary findings that we have got after completing the survey. We also collected data from the participants around future consumer trends, chicken meat consumption, as well as the sustainability aspects as well, which we will not be presenting in today's session. So what we hope to tell or inform the industry is around the current levels of food safety knowledge, attitudes, and chicken meat handling practices, how consumers perceive the safety of chicken meat compared to other protein sources that they consume or handle in the kitchen environment, their preferences and trends in choosing chicken as a protein source, and whether their perceptions, particularly around consumption, have shifted since the AgriFutures survey that was conducted back in 2019. So as part of methodology, this survey was conducted after obtaining the human ethics approval from the University of Adelaide. And the target was the 18 plus years Australian residents responsible for shopping and or preparing food at home. We collected data from mid-March to mid-April, and we had around over 2,000 participants who participated in this survey. We always have to be careful about the length of the survey because people do come across a number of different surveys, and in order to protect people from having survey fatigue, we had to look at the length, but also be mindful that the amount of information that we wanted to get from the participants as well. So the median time for the completion of the survey was 24 minutes. It was very, very pleasing to see that the respondents who were responding to the survey were not actually grumpy with us. They were very happy with the type of questions that we were asking them. Many of them thought that survey was comprehensive, and then they were generously willing to answer some of the questions, which was a good outcome. So survey basically had 4 different areas. The first one was around household purchase and consumption behaviors, knowledge and attitudes, food choice drivers, and the fourth one was demographic and socioeconomic characteristics of the population. So just to go through the respondent characteristics and the spread, here is a spread of male and females and the natural population and the age groups that are in front of you, and the average household income of the respondents. For doing any survey, we obviously have to balance that. For national surveys, we have to balance that in as according to the population from representative of the state population. So here's the spread on the right hand side of the slide in the table. What you can see is the proportion of our sample representative of the national population from various states, and then the areas comparing metro versus rural. Down the track, although we have completed the survey last a month before, or a few weeks before, we are yet to complete the full analysis of the results and the survey. And one of the aspects that we would like to see is how the findings and the consumers' attitudes and preferences vary between metro and rural area. There was a question around the educational qualification of participants that we just to get an understanding about the level of knowledge people have, or their background educational qualification. This is the time now I'll hand over to Trang, so who will take you through the results of this survey that we got so far. Over to you, Trang.
Thanks, Kapil. Can you hear my voice?
I can.
Hi everyone. So I'll give you a snapshot of preliminary results of this survey. Not everything, but just give a snapshot of these results. So firstly, we would like to have to see if chicken meat is still the most popular chicken meat that is consumed in Australia. So we asked respondents, considering the last 12 months, how often were each of the following foods served as part of the main meal in your household. So we've got 7 sources of protein. So these are chicken, beef, other poultry, pork, fish and seafood, lamb, and plant-based meat and protein alternatives such as tofu, tempeh, or Beyond Meat. So we ask them how often, and we give them options from never to every day as the frequency. So we've coded this graph as so you see 2 color scheme. When there's a lot of gray, then that meat is not frequently consumed, and where there's a lot of blue, so it's starting from every 2 to 3 weeks to every day. Darker blue is more frequent consumed meat. So we've sorted this into, we sorted these bars by the everyday category. So we still see that chicken is on the top, and if we look at the blue color, then more than 90% of our respondents consumed chicken meat at least once a week in the last 12 months. And in 2019, one of the AgriFutures surveyed reported that 68% of Australian households serve chicken meat as at least twice a week. By Umberger and Malek, reported in 2021. So we saw a slightly increase in this statistic. So if you see in the lighter blue, is 74%. So 74% of our respondents consumed chicken meat at least twice a week. Beef is also quite a popular source of protein that people consumed in the last 12 months. So nearly 80% of our respondents consumed once a week, and more than and nearly 50% of our respondents consumed beef at least twice a week. So we've got pork and fish and seafood are also in the similar to get these 2 meats in the similar frequent consumption, as around 50% of our respondents consumed these 2 sources of protein once per week. Next slide, please, Kapil. So we asked several social economic characteristic of respondents, so we can later analyze the level of knowledge, attitudes, and practices based on these social demographic characteristics. So previously we got age, gender, education, locations. We also asked them the household composition. So most of our respondents are family with adults or family with children. We asked them about working arrangement. Most of our respondents, 46%, are working full-time, 20% are retired, and 18% working part-time. We've got several questions teasing out respondents' cultural background, because we would like to see if the level of knowledge on food safety would be different from people with different cultural background, as in Australia we have a diverse cultural backgrounds between people. So we asked, were you born in Australia? Most of our respondents, 78%, were born in Australia. If they were born elsewhere, that were Great Britain, 27%, India, China, New Zealand, and Malaysia, the top 5 countries that our respondents were born at. And then we also asked them what cultural background do they themselves identify with. So most of our respondents, 62%, identify themselves as Australian. Next slide, please, Kapil. So to have a set of practices that go across the purchase points. So from the points that consumers bought chicken meat from the supermarket or store or meat stores to where they consume, and after that we developed a framework so we can have a comprehensive understanding and construct all the behaviors that happen during this in-house management, food management practices. So we've got 5 stages covering this period. So we have transporting, storing, preparing and cooking, serving, and managing leftovers. So we've got these 5 stages where things can happen with chickens, with handling chicken meat. And in the bottom half of this slide, you see that we use reliable resources such as Australian Chicken Meat Federation, World Health Organization, FSAN, or Food Safety Information Council to see what are the principles of food safety that we could then apply to chicken meat and where it can happen in these stages. So we've got the WHO 5 keys to safer food. So keep clean, separate raw and cooked, cook thoroughly, keep food in safe temperature, and use safe water and raw materials. So these are consistent with what the Australian Chicken Meat Federation use as a guideline for safe handling chicken meat. So these behaviors or practices could be around, for example, most raw and cooked chicken meat can be stored in the fridge at 5 or below Celsius degree for 2 to 3 days. Beyond that, it could violate the food safety aspect, or one of the principle to improve food safety would be like we've got to cook the chicken meat thoroughly so it can cure all the bacteria. So we lay out all of these practices. So example would be for repairing and cooking, we have thawing behaviors where chicken meat should be thawed in the fridge or microwave and not at the room temperature. So we would have statement around these behaviors and practices, and later I'll show you how we ask respondents about these recommended practices. Next slide, please. So in the first set of questions related to food safety, we asked about food handling practice, chicken meat handling practices. So the question is, how often do you do the following practices when handling and repairing chicken meat at home post-purchasing? We've got 21 statements for this question, and we've got here 5 most common behaviors related to chicken meat food safety. So we ask them how often and let them rate, let them answer from the scale to 1 to 7. 1 is never and 7 is always. And the half point is the number 4 point, half of the time. So we've seen here, this is an average score, so it would be interpreted as an average person in our sample. So all of these average points is above between 6 to 7, so it's usually to always. So we've got, for example, after buying raw chicken meat, I refrigerate it within 2 hours of purchase. This is recommended, and an average person would usually always do this, so which is good. I check if chicken meat is thoroughly cooked by ensuring juices run clear and meat is no longer pink. My fridge temperature is set at or below 5 Celsius degree. I clean or sanitize the cutting board and knife after cutting raw chicken meat, and I wash hand with soaps before and after handling chicken meat. So these are all recommended practices, and we're pleased to see that this is common behaviors amongst our sample. Next slide, please. And then here we've got 5 least common behaviors related to chicken meat food safety, chicken meat safety. So we also throw in some of the behaviors that might not be recommended. For example, around thawing chicken meat, if it should be thawing at room temperature or not, or wash chicken meats before cooking it. So we can see here that all of these practices for an average person is like less than half of the time, but reaching at the half point. So number 10, for example, I throw chicken meat at room temperature on a counter. So this actually would not be recommended, but we can see that nearly half of the time an average person in our sample did this. And then refrigerating chicken after 2 hours of purchase would also pose some risk for food safety. And we also see an average person would do this nearly half of the time. And washing chicken meat were also done by an average person nearly half of the time. Next slide, please, Kapil. In terms of assessing consumers' knowledge related to chicken meat safety, we had 22 statements related to food safety throughout the stages that I mentioned before. We asked respondents, please indicate whether the following statements are true or false. So they can choose true, false, or don't know options. And we've got here the top 7 don't know responses. So these are the most confusing for consumer around food safety. So we've got the first statement number 8 is the most confusing. Most people don't know about this, so 33% of people do not know if this is true or false. So freezing chicken meat kills all harmful bacteria, and nearly 27% say that they think it's true. Freezing chicken meat can kill all harmful bacteria, and well, the correct answer is false. We've got washing chicken meat. Raw chicken meat should be washed before cooking. More than 40% of people say true, it should be washed. And 32% of our respondents do not know if this is true or false. In the food safety, we don't recommend this because it can pose the risk of cross-contamination, and the juices from chicken could be splashed to other surfaces and contaminate other food. And actually, washing chicken meat does nothing to improve food safety. Only cooking it to 73 Celsius degree would kill bacteria. And then we've got, for example, some of the behaviors that people are confusing and chose the wrong answer is statement around throwing chicken meat. So the statement 10 and 9, frozen chicken meat should be thawed in the fridge or microwave. A lot of people, more than the 14.5% say this is false, and 18.5% think they chose that I don't know. So the next statement is around throwing chicken at room temperature, where there's a lot of people, nearly 50% say that this is true. It can be thawed at room temperature, and nearly 70% do not know what was the right answer. Next slide, please, Kapil. So what we do preliminary with this score is that there are 22 statements. We assign 1 + 1 points for each correct answer to compute a knowledge score, and 0 point to each incorrect or don't know answer. So a knowledge score would range from 0 to 22 points. And then in the literature we see, so we could have different ways to categorize the level of knowledge in our sample. One of the way is the Bloom's 80% mastery rule. So according to Bloom's mastery learning criteria, a score of 80% or higher in our case is 18 points out of 22 points, indicates sufficient knowledge mastery in the subject area. There's some other ways to do it, and some people would cut off at 60% or 75% for good knowledge. So in the right-hand side, we've got our results for this knowledge score in our sample. So you can see that amongst the 2,032 respondents, no one have reached 22 points. So it's ranging from 0 to 22 points for our sample. The mean is 14.2 with 3 points of standard deviation. This mean is below the cutoff point of 18. And in the right bottom corner here, I've got a graph that illustrated all the score in our sample. So you can see that most of the respondents in the range of 14, 15, 16, 17 points. And if we count all the percentages from the 18%, which is supposed to be, according to Bloom, would be sufficient knowledge or good knowledge, would be only 5.3% for our sample. Next slide, please, Kapil. We also asked some of their perceptions on issues related to chicken meat food safety and foodborne illnesses in general. Question 11, we asked, in your opinion, what is the risk of getting food poisoning from eating chicken meat in Australia? So the majority, so the highest percentage of our respondents choose low risk, more than 28%, and also more than a quarter say neutral, which is not low, not high, but in a lower point. But there's also more than 19% think that this is a high risk for them to get food poisoning from eating chicken meat in Australia, and nearly 6% say this is very high risk for them, and 4.2 say extremely high risk. In question 12, we asked, do you believe foodborne illnesses in general, not only from chicken meat, are a significant concern for your household? So the trend is also people choose, the highest percentage choose low concern or very low concern, but there's also more than nearly 12% say this is a high concern for them, and 4.8% say this is a very high concern. And then we try to see how they perceive themselves as having a good knowledge. How confident are you that you have the knowledge about chicken meat handling practices that can prevent food poisoning in your household? In our sample, we have a very confident consumers. So most of the people choose confidence, very confident, or extremely confident. It might be contradictory with some of the score that we saw earlier. In question 14, we asked, have you had food poisoning before? And nearly half of our respondents say yes. 27% had it once before, and 19% had it more than once. And of these incidents, nearly half of our respondents, of these incidents, we have 18 occurred at home, where practicing these handling practices to improve food safety might be able to prevent these 18% at home, and 28% happened at the restaurant. So I think that is a snapshot of our results that we've got so far. I'll now hand over to Kapil.
Thank you, Trang. So you have heard about the results that we got so far, and there are a number of different ways this data could be looked at. And we just started to look at some of the numbers and the responses, but there are some trends or some preliminary observations that we could make based on this survey. And the first one was, as I indicated before, it was received very positively by the participants. And half of the respondents, as you just heard, reported experiencing food poisoning at least once. And majority of these incidents were in restaurants, which is not entirely surprising from what I learned in the literature. It has been reported, consistent reports have been found overseas as well. Um, Overall, chicken meat is still most frequently served protein product, or consumed protein product, and the consumption figure has gone up from 68% to 74% compared to 2019 to the figure in 2025. And based on the Bloom's mastery rule, what we can see that respondents' knowledge of food safety was not adequate based on the information that you saw, particularly around two areas where a lot of messaging has gone around, awareness around the washing of chicken meat, or washing or rinsing of raw poultry before cooking. And washing is potentially unsafe because of the splashing of contaminated water that could lead to transfer of pathogens to other foods and contaminate kitchen surfaces, as well as the thawing of chicken meat at room temperature on the counter, which is also potentially unsafe because the bacteria could replicate rapidly at room temperature. That's it from me. Sarika, thank you again, but I'm happy to answer questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kapil and Trang. I do actually have a question for you both, and there was another one in our chat which Trang has responded to. And just for everybody that is on the call, the first question was regarding the format of the survey and how it was administered. So the survey was an online survey containing the series of questions, some of which you've seen the results presented of today. And the second question that we've received in the chat regards or relates to consumer or community sentiment, and not specifically from this survey, but has from other research. Do you know if community and or consumer attitudes towards chlorinated chicken? Sorry.
Look, we did not specifically ask around the chlorinated chicken versus non-chlorinated chicken, although I understand the practices are different overseas. But we have heard anecdotal references where there are the pockets of populations who complained about the smell of chlorine as such coming from chicken meat. So we did not specifically ask the question around the sensing properties or the odor or the chlorine odor coming from chicken meat in this context, particularly in this survey.
And just another a question from me, sort of picking up on a few of the comments regarding respondents, whether they'd experienced food safety before, food poisoning before, and that this was often in a commercial or restaurant type setting. Hypothetically, if you were to administer a survey to the commercial sector, would the questions fundamentally be different, or would there be any fundamental different questions that would be asked? I guess principally the food safety related questions would hold true, but is there anything that would be a point of difference?
Look, thank you. That's a great question, Sarika. And I think the questions that we would ask in commercial settings, particularly restaurant settings, some of them will be different because the food is prepared in a different way, in batches, in a large quantity. We have not done survey, but we have done some work in commercial settings for egg industry in the past, and we learned um, very important lessons in terms of how chefs actually handle what they say the right thing, but when it comes down to handling and actually doing things, they're quite different, two different things altogether. So the type of questions would slightly vary in terms of how the large batches or batches of meat is prepared, in terms of storage, in terms of thawing, and washing as well, or the sanitizing of or cleaning of the cutting board is a big one as well. And that some of the questions could be similar, but there could be some other questions which I think will be quite different for commercial settings.
Thank you very much. And yeah, we look forward to sort of seeing how the research progresses, and then what we're able to do on the other end to support the community or consumer education piece. But we're coming to the end of our allocated slot for the webinar, so I'll start to draw us into the closing part of the webinar. Leslie, you're off the hook this time with questions, but given that your research is at its early stages, we will there may be more questions when we feature the research again, sort of later on when it's further progressed. So in closing, I'd like to bring your attention to a post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen. And we greatly appreciate your time in providing any feedback so that we can make improvements to the upcoming webinars part of the series. Just a quick reminder that we will provide links to any resources or useful resources that support the content of content presented in this webinar. And as always, just a general reminder to please report anything unusual, or if you have any concerns about potential EADs, to the EAD hotline. But I'd like to extend a massive thank you to our presenters, so Leslie, Kapil and Trang, and appreciate your time in sharing the research that you have underway. And look, we really look forward to working with you to deliver the anticipated outcomes over the course of the separate research projects. And of course, we're always very thankful for the audience, anybody that takes the time to register, attend, or as well as view the recordings after they've been circulated. But with that, I'd like to wish you all a fantastic rest of your Wednesday, and we shall see you next time. Bye for now.